Hi, my name is Fred Crawford. Studied at Muhlenberg College, Mount Airy, and we served at St. Luke in Allentown as an assistant pastor, Christ Lutheran Church in Mahanoy City, Zion Tamaqua, and now back in my retirement, back to Christ in Mahanoy City. My 50th anniversary of ordination was last year, June 2020. But as we watch this video on October the 5th, I also rejoice and give thanks that Cheryl and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary just 3 days ago. And without her and our children, Fred and Mary Kate, their love and their support, this ongoing 51-year ministry as a parish pastor would not have been possible. We were married on October the 2nd, 1971, in St. John Lutheran Church in what I still call Upper Muck Chunk, even though most of the world now knows it as Jim Thorpe, and half of the people from New Jersey show up there on a weekend. Cheryl and I were both members of St. John, baptized there, confirmed there, as was, by the way, a fellow by the name of Sam Zeiser. Cheryl lived about a block away from the church, while I lived 4 miles away in Nesquehoning. But St. John was my grandmother's church. And that's where this whole remarkable 51-year journey as a parish pastor began. Began with a phone call. I was a sophomore in high school, and I was an every Sunday person in church. My mom and I were every Sunday goers. There wasn't the slightest thought in my mind of ordained ministry. Then one day, our new pastor, Oscar Schleshman, called me and asked if I would serve as an acolyte. Now, Oscar was ahead of his time. Most of you have never met him or didn't know him. In 1960, he was a very rare and sometimes belittled and often mocked creature called a high churchman, celebrating Holy Eucharist every Sunday, believe it or not, parading around on a Sunday morning in full Eucharistic vestments and chanting the liturgy, while at the same time, almost all of his colleagues were still in cassock and surplice and celebrating the sacrament on what we used to call St. Primus Day, the first Sunday of the month. So in actuality, his invitation to be an acolyte was really an invitation to be an altar boy. But still, not the slightest thought about ordained ministry. Then a few years later, I was off to Muhlenberg College with really no idea where my life was going. I told folks that I was going to be a doctor, but I knew that wasn't going to ever happen. And then one weekend when I was home from college, and actually, truthfully, I was home from college every weekend because I was seriously homesick. Someone in the wee hours of the morning began pounding on the wall that separated the two sides of our double home in Nesquehoning. Our neighbors were our landlords. My grandfather and I ran next door and found Dan on the floor. The family doctor had been called. Back then, family doctors actually came to the house, even though it was pretty obvious that the doctor wasn't going to be able to help. And I was told, go get the priest. Now understand, this devoted, faithful, pious, religious family, who when I was growing up, treated me like the son that none of them ever had, really didn't like the priest. When he walked into that house that night, there was a peace, there was a calm, there was a presence that was truly palpable. And I thought to myself, if the Lord can use this rather flawed human being, maybe he can use me. That night, I experienced what I continue to call pastoral privilege. So I went back to Muhlenberg on Monday morning, walked into the chaplain's office and asked how I go about getting into seminary. I still use that phrase, pastoral privilege, and I use it often. The privilege that comes with the office to which we flawed human beings have been called. For 51 years, I have had the privilege of being invited into people's lives, invited to share their life story, the privilege of being with the people of God when they mourn and when they celebrate, the privilege of meeting with them as they pour out their hurts and their fears, their dreams and their expectations, and yes, confess their sins. The privilege of being with the people of God in their homes and in nursing homes, in hospitals, in prisons, in the grocery store, on the street, at school activities, concerts, theater, art, productions, games, and on 42 different college campuses where I visited members of the parish who, like me, were trying to figure out exactly who they are and where they were going with their life. And most obviously, the privilege of celebrating with the people of God each week as we gather around Word and Sacrament. I have been enormously blessed and privileged. And I'm well aware that some of that privilege was simply bestowed on the office, but some was hard-earned. After 3 years as an assistant pastor at St. Luke in Allentown, I met with Bishop Toussaint and asked to be considered for a call to a church of my own. I was thinking about some small church back home in the coal regions, some place where I could walk out my front door in the morning and look and see a coal bank. He said to me, "I'll call you tomorrow." A month or so later, Cheryl and I were on our way to Christ Lutheran in Malnai City, which, when we arrived in 1973, was a town of about 7,000 people with 21 churches plus a synagogue, and almost all of them with a resident clergy. Today, things are different. The population has dropped from 7,000 to below 4,000. The graduating class of Malnai area back then was 196. This past year, it was 66. There are a dozen church buildings up for sale and deteriorating. And when we have our monthly pastors' meetings, there are now usually 4 of us around the table. And only one of those 4 actually live in the town. We spent 19 wonderful years there, until one evening my phone rang again. This time the bishop called and asked if I would consider a call to Zion in Tamaulipas. And that led to another 14 really good years of pastoral ministry at Zion. I retired on the last Sunday in July of 2006. And on the first Sunday in August, I was back at the altar in Malnai City, where the absolute privilege and the opportunity to be a parish pastor still continues to this very day. And now these days is maybe more important than it ever was. One big difference. I'm no longer able to run down the street like I did in both Malnai City and Tamaulipas, grab my helmet, pull on my coat and boots, and jump into the fire truck and serve the people of God just by being a good neighbor. You can't imagine how much I miss that. It doesn't take long for people to stop being parishioners and start being part of your life.